Hello and welcome to the Great Legal Mind Show. Today, our guest is Mr. Anand Desai, Managing Partner, DSK Legal. Anand, a very warm welcome to you on the show.
Thank you.
Anand, you've also been a litigation lawyer besides being on some like really good top transactions. Overall the legal industry did fairly okay, if not excellent. But one practice that in general did not do so well was litigation during the pandemic. So how, what is the recovery period now? How it is going to come out of it? How do you see that?
I think that you're right. Courts were closed. People were not easily able to adapt to online hearing. Especially the more senior people, I think, struggled a bit more, although they are now very good at it. But now courts are functioning, and I think you'll see it back pretty much to normal around the country, and even the international arbitrations are going full scale. So I would say it's pretty much back to what we would call normal.
Okay, you talked about arbitration, and we have seen that some of the foreign award enforcement has been a challenge in India. How do you think that it is going to affect the confidence of foreign companies who have their huge business interests in India?
So, as you know, on the ease of doing business index, our contract enforcement profile is extremely poor. A lot of other indices have grown well, have been recognized as having been vastly improved. The unfortunate situation is that in India, we still have a fair amount of interference by the courts against awards. That encourages people to challenge awards. It encourages people to even take a chance sometimes. And that delays the execution. It's the same in decrees. It's not as easy as people think it is to execute a decree also. So, is it going to affect investment? I think it certainly will continue to have an impact because it is a factor a lot of people take into account. I was asked a question about a year ago by a private equity fund saying that we are going to frame our decision to invest into an Indian company based on the answer you give to this question. And the question is, if we have an international award for recovery of money or assets, can we or can we not confidently say it will be executed in 4 months? And I said, you cannot. And that was the end of that investment. So that's a live example of a concern because now, whether 4 months is right or wrong is not the debate. The debate is this: a question asked, an answer given, and the investor did not come. But having said that, I don't think it's as much of a dampener to many investors who are quite happy to still come into India. So I'd say it has a bearing, but it's not a huge dampener.
So, but so India, of course, is a very, very big market, and there's a huge amount of domestic consumption in India, and that's the reason it's a business call that people come to India. But does that also amount to some kind of arm twisting to these companies?
So I think any investor, any business has a risk-taking profile. One that you and I identify because we are in this profession. There are many others. So typically any investor or business is going to have a list of things they treat as risks. I don't know how important this is to several. To some it is, but to several I don't think it's a big issue because somewhere they factor into the projection and planning that a possibility exists of not recovering. And you then say, X amount of my potential revenue is a doubtful debt, for example. I think it also depends who the counterparties are you're dealing with. We've had situations we've seen where counterparties are quite happy to honor commitments, go into a settlement mode very quickly. So I think that's another factor a lot of people lose sight of. To just paint everyone with the same brush that the system doesn't work because people challenge awards may not be a good broad brush statement to make.
Okay, moving on to something very interesting that I noticed in BSK, which is your art law practice. Now, let me ask you a question that you know, everybody says that it takes time for courts to function and so on and so forth. How easy or tough it is for an artist whose art is plagiarized or copied to get the relief, through Indian judicial system? What is the advice? How, what do you say about that?
So in India, one thing I must say is a very good thing. We are able to expect and procure urgent orders relatively easily compared to many other parts of the world. So what we call ad interim relief or urgent relief, particularly injunctive relief, is not so difficult to get in India. Judges in most of the courts are sophisticated, they understand intellectual property. Of course, there are some who are better than others, but that applies to every field. So I would say if somebody feels there's a problem of plagiarism or piracy or copying, it is fairly easy to approach a court, seek an injunction for that person not to sell or to copy further. Whether you'll get damages from that person is another question, because damages is the final relief. But injunctive relief can be obtained pretty quickly.
I think that itself is a pretty good relief because it at least blocks the piracy or the sales for the time being till the time final orders are given. Okay, now moving on to your firm DSK. What are the opportunities you see in the market that is going to propel DSK Legal's growth now?
Well, I think the number of new laws that we have in India, and as they settle down, the amount of litigation that takes place for a litigation lawyer is an opportunity. I just heard a talk yesterday, by the way, that I found very close to heart. That a lot of people look at problems as problems. Some people look at problems as opportunities to benefit from. And I think that is something a lot of lawyers are seeing in terms of, we've had a lot of litigation under the Amended Arbitration Act, for example, under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The schemes of the RBI that sort of keep changing in terms of dealing with bad debts, defaulters. So the development or settling down of the law, depends how you look at it, I think presents a great opportunity. So any new law that comes is an opportunity. And I genuinely believe, given where our economy is and the drive of the government to push, production in certain areas, insolvency and bankruptcy is a huge opportunity. International arbitration is a huge opportunity because, as you know, we are pushing very hard in India to make India a center of excellence for arbitration. So those two, I would say, for us, present big opportunities. But in addition, the other area which we feel a lot of work is coming in currently is what was called white collar crime. But today, as you know, a lot of what we believed were in the nature of civil issues have a criminal element. And we have several agencies, so Enforcement Directorate, CBI, SFIO, the EOW wings of the police, all of who are quite active. And not too many firms actually give that area of advice or do that kind of matters. So we are one of those that does. So that's another area I believe can be of huge growth for us.
Okay. Yeah, I think, changing laws. I mean, the problems are, of course, opportunities. And, when we talk to a layman, they say definitely for lawyers. So, okay. So, let me just, ask you, a question related to, a very illustrious family that you come from, which is a family of, I would call, institution builder. And a prime example is L&T. Now, what are the learnings that you got from your grandfather that you're going to apply to DSK to make it as good as your other institutions in the family that got built up? And second related question to that is that I notice you're also ex Anderson, and so what is the kind of stuff that you really picked up from an organization like Anderson that is going to be applied to DSK Legal?
So I think more than my grandfather, my father was a great source of learning and inspiration to me. L&T was run and continues to be run as a professionally managed company, unlike most Indian businesses that are family owned and family run. And a few learnings I got pretty early on in that time of my father being in L&T was each one has come here to work to achieve their own objective or their own aspirations. So yes, we are paying someone, but the more you allow them to achieve their aspirations, project them correctly, if they do something well, let them be recognized and not just the owner being recognized. If there's a problem, you take the blame. Ultimately, you're the one responsible for the entire business. So I think these were interesting learnings as to how you keep people involved, people motivated, allow people to grow in a career which gives them satisfaction and not just a job. It's very easy to treat people as sort of semi-machines, unfortunately, because it's a production cycle on which you're making money, making a profit. So your least cost, more repetitive work, the more money you can make if you look at it as a production line. But I think if you actually, so L&T was an engineering giant. So engineers are also educated people. Of course, you have the shop floor where you manufacture. But those were interesting learnings. I think the other thing was that the whole purpose is to allow the institution to continue after you. So it's not a one person centric or one family centric mindset that the day we want to stop, we'll stop. The day we want to get out, we'll get out, and that's the end of it. So even nurturing others to take on leadership roles, to actually feel that they, and L&T, as you've seen, A.M. Nayak was there throughout his career. The person who's still the executive chairman did a fantastic job. His successor has also been named already and has taken over as executive. So I think continuity is also a big factor, and it's not a father to son continuity, which is very common in India, or a father to daughter continuity, but actually a situation where people feel. So L&T had a policy also that no family member of the management can join as an employee or as a member of the staff. So
really, even if they are capable or they come independently, that's the policy?
The question becomes, well, it used to be, I can't say what it is now. It's not a question of independence, but if you're that good, you'll get a job anywhere, anyway. So it's not a question that this is the only place you should be.
And the fact did that work well for them?
It seemed to have worked well, because I know for a fact, at least my father was there, a couple of the senior people had come and said, can my son join? He's very well qualified, come back from the United States. And the answer was no, because the culture we are building is perceived to be a completely objective, professional culture. And I think the sense was objectivity gets in some manner affected when someone very dear to you is in a position which you can influence.
That's a message for a whole lot of people actually who would be probably listening to us and people who are around, because there's a lot of conversations about nepotism that's going on, in the newspaper headlines and all of that. So I think that's a fairly, good and strong message.
Again, look, I'm not saying it's a right and wrong. I don't think I'm saying it's good or it's bad. It's just that's the way it was. And
it's being politically correct.
It succeeded for them, like it may not succeed in certain places, because I think it depends on many other factors of actually getting in the right people also. If you don't get in the right people, just doing this itself is not going to take you anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in fact, you've talked about, I think...
You didn't answer about Anderson. You asked me two questions in that. Let me answer that.
The other one was Anderson, yes.
So, Anderson to me was a revelation as to how a professional services firm could actually operate exceedingly efficiently. And what I liked about it, although it was barely for 10 months before Anderson shut down, from the time we joined to it shutting down, and we were not the reason for it. There were other reasons, as you know. But I just found the systems, processes, the methodologies were so well thought through, including effectively affecting people's behavioral patterns, So at a certain level of seniority, part of your compensation came as a reimbursement for fuel, driver, things like that. So by definition, you could claim that if you had a driver and a car, fuel consumption. A part came towards reimbursement of a charitable donation. So, I'm not going to details, but I just found that a lot of thought had gone into it. So a lot of us assume that each one can do what they want. But the more and more people I've met over the years have said there was a certain trait or behavioral pattern expected of a person in Anderson. And you start asking yourself, how did that happen? So one, of course, is the recruitment process, which was very rigid. The training, which is a huge factor for them. But then, like I said, the systems. So if you did not follow the systems, there were direct repercussions. I know a lot of organizations, including DSK, I can tell you, has systems, but not necessarily a consequence if someone does not follow them. So that is a fantastic learning for me as to what can be done and how behavior can be at least directed in a certain way.
So tell me, how important, culture could be for the young lawyers who are looking to join a law firm. So let's actually look at now the legal industry, and it's pretty much, professional services firm. So what's the importance of culture according to you for someone who is joining? Because, we've done a survey recently, last year, and some of the things, which topped their list of priorities included the headline transactions that I get to work on, the kind of client that I get to work on, the money, and then the growth. So, I didn't really see the culture and a whole lot of other aspects, that, one could think of. So, what is the importance of culture? What should be the right mix of the things one should actually look at when you're actually looking to build your career in a law firm?
So one is, I think, definitely every organization or every set of people will have a certain underlying set of ethics, values, and culture. I'm not saying moral, immoral, don't misunderstand. When I say ethics and values, it is the way you function, the way you treat each other, the way you either want to support somebody else, possibly exploit somebody else. Again, there's no right and wrong or good and bad. But I think these are factors that those youngsters who are believing in themselves as having a large opportunity to build their own career must think of it. Because I know a lot of youngsters think because they join a certain firm or they join a certain senior, in case of counsel, that's a stepping stone to their success. And I don't know whether they think it through adequately. It's a bit like saying I want to go abroad and do my LLM. And I often ask, what are you trying to achieve? Because I understand people go to do an LLM because people go to do an LLM. But what are you trying to achieve by that LLM?
Correct.
It's going to spend 10 months or a year, a lot of money, a lot of time and effort. So again, I would say the culture in a firm, I think, helps people to identify comfort levels. Does it suit me? Are these the kind of people I like to spend my time with or day with? Are they helping me build my career? It's not teaching. Again, a lot of people confuse this with teaching. It's not teaching. We are not here to teach. We're not a university. We're not a school. But I think places where there's a sense that we want the young lawyers or our colleagues to succeed on their own, to build their careers in the manner that suits them. And again, I think each one has a different way of building a career. Some may be outstanding at impressing people to get work. Some may be outstanding at actually sitting down and doing work, but not so comfortable going out to get work. Some may be excellent at developing a new practice area or a new thought. So I think each one needs to first understand themselves. That's the way I look at it. And I tell a lot of youngsters who I interview that what are your strong points? What are your likes and dislikes? And I don't think till you analyze that, you know where you want to join. And your point is well taken. I know a lot of people just say tier 1 firm, tier 2 firm, big firm, small firm, firm that's very good at this practice area, firm that's very good at tax. But I'm not sure how much that in itself helps anyone's career.
I just wanted to ask you a question that don't you think that, in most of the organization, it is the expectation that you should be a rainmaker and then only you succeed. And then I think everybody starts to think that, being rainmaker is the most important thing if I want to grow. and even if they don't have natural knack for selling, they still get into it and probably don't do very well. So what do you say on that?
So first of all, you're absolutely right. I think this whole concept of rainmaking has become very important in people's minds, maybe too important. But I firmly believe personally that rainmaking can also just be by the quality of your work. So of course you need that first opportunity or second opportunity, or maybe third. But I think if someone's good at what they do, word will go around. They may not get work that they aspire towards immediately, and there's nothing wrong in that. They may not they may be more reactive than proactive in doing work that people give them. But I think building a career through that, to me, is a very solid way of doing it. Because if your work speaks for you or speaks for what you stand for, to me, that's extremely important. And I've seen over the years, very often, the other side in a matter comes to us. A client who's happy will refer his friend or friends. People from the industry as an association would come together and say, look, these guys seem to know what they're talking about. So I don't think the understanding that rainmaking is running all over the world and meeting people and impressing them to get work is the only way to do it. But you're right, I think that's the impression that's been formed, that if you travel, meet people, land up at their offices, that's something that's expected. And I do know a lot of people who do that. It's certainly one way. And if you're good at it, do it. But if you're not good at it, trying to use somebody else's success as yours may not work.
Absolutely, I think two words of wisdom. I completely agree that particularly in professional services industry, the best way to get the work is through word of mouth, through client referrals, and that's the cheapest way of doing the business development. So, okay, now moving on to your own interest. I actually see you do a lot of work in non-profit areas, I think, as your area of interest. What are the causes that are close to your heart?
There's no particular cause. So I have been drawn into this by friends, by clients, and I'm quite happy to participate. I've always felt that there's more to life than just going to office and earning money, or going to your career and earning money. I think the satisfaction one gets, and I noticed that about myself. I think if I'm in a social environment, I'll tend to talk more about some of those aspects than about my career or my so-called achievements. So there are a vast range of areas I've been fortunate to participate in with people. In fact, my daughter is more socially oriented than I am, and I admire what she does. She's around 30 now. So I think some people it comes to naturally as an occupation full-time. For me, it's not. But if somebody asks for help, I'm very happy to help. And like I said, I've been fortunate to be asked to participate in a range of initiatives. And I find them very satisfying. If I can contribute even a 0.001%, it's something I feel happy about.
Super. Now let me ask you some more questions. So Anand, tell me one rumor that really annoyed you about you.
So in my previous firm and the place I worked before that, for some strange reason, on a fairly regular basis, a rumor would start that I was leaving. And I could never understand that, including my own colleagues being asked if they went to court or went sometimes to a client meeting that has Anand left the firm or is he leaving the firm? And I used to just wonder, where is this being generated from? Because it's not like I talked about it. I guess now the rumor could be whether I've retired yet, because I sometimes talk of it. Those, I guess, are two rumors that annoy me.
If you were not a lawyer, what would you be?
To be honest, I've tried to do business. I was not successful. I never even thought of doing things like accounts and medicine because it just did not suit my nature. So I'd probably be, I would have loved to be a sportsman. I was a decent sportsman through my childhood and through my college. And I guess that's something I really enjoyed, but decided there's not much money in it and not much of a future in India at that point of time.
Yeah.
Professional sports had not really developed very much at that time. They've developed far more later. But yeah, I think I probably enjoyed sports next to the law.
Which one?
So actually, I was brought up playing sports at a very young age. My mother actually is a very accomplished sportswoman for swimming, tennis, and she was the first Indian national to win the All India Golf. Went on to become the Arjuna Award winner.
Oh,
So from age 5, I was put into competitive swimming. So I won the Western India, went to nationals, then table tennis, then golf. So in all these, I was good and I went to the national level, and then I stopped. But I used to enjoy it, and the reason for shifting from one to the other was health reasons. So swimming I had a problem, so that's why table tennis had a problem. So therefore golf, and then career started. So that was the end of it.
good. So now I'm going to ask, I'm going to give you one word, several words, and you have to react to that one word in one word only. So react to the following words that I'm going to give you. Lawyer,
Advocate,
awards,
success,
social media,
confusion,
love,
satisfaction,
Anand.
joy.
Good. So let me just okay. Let me ask you, one final question, and that question is that what's your advice to law students who are passing out in these difficult times? What is your career advice to them?
So, it's not just now, I've said this to many people. I think a lot of youngsters believe that getting their first job is the end of the race. And I keep saying, look, the day you've come out of college, your race is beginning. If you want to call it a race, or your opportunity is beginning. So it's not that first job that's really taking you to your destination. If you have a long-term view, and I say this again, like I said quite often here in our organization, or to people who come to me and ask me for, as you're asking me, that to my mind, if a lawyer is recognized between his 10th to 15th year of practice, he is very likely to have a good career. But to get to that stage in a manner that's going to allow that to happen is working backwards at one level. Yes, a lot of it will come by chance, opportunity, but if you put your head down and work on something, it will at some stage start paying dividends. And this is something not many people seem to get. They all seem to think, but I got a gold medal, or I'm a topper in college, hence I'm entitled to get so much money. And to me, that's a non-starter because you have finished your education, you're starting out your career, but how are you going to build your career? It's like building anything. Nothing just gets built. There's a foundation. There's a whole analysis as to what you're trying to achieve. You build your superstructure on top of that. I often think that if youngsters just sit and think about this for some time, and within that, what suits them. So because we have a media practice that is quite well known, a lot of youngsters come to me and say, we want to be a media lawyer. And I say, and what does that mean to you? Working with celebrities. Okay, and what is going to make the celebrity come to you as your client? Blank. And what are you doing to develop the skill sets that are going to be of value to them? Blank. So I say, please go rethink your thought process and come back, because it's not just that you want to do something and it happens. If life was so easy, and wishes were horses, as they say, we would not be working so hard. So suiting your own purposes, what suits you as a person. Like some people love tax. Some people don't like tax. They don't understand numbers. Now for a guy who doesn't like tax to say, I want to be a tax expert, is a bit counterproductive, because your target is a lot further away than an area you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. So it is
analyze yourself, I would say, and then just put your head down and work hard. And I strongly believe opportunities will come if you work hard.
So it is more like a marathon than a sprint, and
it has to be. It has to be, because
build your strength and then go ahead with what you want to do. Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Or do technology. That's the easy one nowadays, because youngsters understand technology much more than the older people. So that's
absolutely that is absolutely right. In fact, one question that I actually missed asking you, which I'm going to ask you now, there's one very famous case that you worked on, and which is that Salman Khan matter. Now, my question is not about what is the argument that you had given in that matter, but the question is that when there is so much media glare around a matter that you're working on, what is the kind of pressure you feel, and how does that affect your work?
So one is, over the years, I've had other clients also who are in the media glare, and our main target in many of those cases is to keep them out of the media to the extent we can. So I've been doing work with people in the film industry from 1992, which is a long time now. And a lot of the others you don't see so much in focus because we managed over the years to divert attention. Salman's case actually was a criminal case. I did not do criminal work before that, to be honest. So it was something very new. It had taken its own twists and turns so I was doing civil work for him, but not criminal work. I think more than the media, the challenge, genuinely, in my view, in matters like this, is the person's attention. When I say persons, meaning anyone and everyone has a view. Anyone and everyone has an opinion. You have no idea how many people used to tell me what they thought he had done or not done. And not that I wanted to know. People would send me emails with advice as to what position in law to take. People would send me WhatsApp messages and SMSs because for some reason, everyone thought they had some knowledge which, I was incapable of or the team was incapable of. And the other, to me personally, the challenge is the crowds of people who, horde around and you're literally pushing and shoving your way through. It is quite intimidating, at least to a person like me. So he just seems to draw a tremendous number of people around wherever he turns up, including our office. Sometimes the whole area gets, jam-packed with people. So getting in and out of courtrooms when he's there is physically a challenge since you are not asking about the matter. Those are the things that concern me more than the media attention.
In fact, I also heard about the annual party that you do, which is always star-studded. And that's a talk of the town all the time.
Well, our annual parties happened only twice or thrice in all these years. But anyway, so we have always thought we'll make an annual party, but this is again a place our discipline has not lived up to what it should be, as in some other areas.
Yeah. So, with this note, I would, like to thank you for your time and all the best to you and DSK Legal. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise, and all the best to you as well. Thank you so much.